Then we're going to go look for patterns across the interviews, patterns around what we call our 5 rings of buying insight.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how we build the persona. We pull out verbatim quotes. We'd want you to pull out quotes from this interview and that bring color to these points.
Welcome to the Magnificent Marketing Podcast, where we interview the top marketing experts in the world and keep you up to date on all the changes and best practices to help you grow your business and stay on the cutting edge. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Adele Revella, who is the CEO of Buyer Persona Institute and author of Buyer Personas, How to Gain Insight into Your Customers' Expectations, Align Your Marketing Strategies, and Win More Business. And this was recently named a top 5 business book by Fortune magazine. Adele's unique perspective derives from decades of experience as a sales and marketing executive, trainer, researcher, and entrepreneur. And today we are going to have Adele, who is literally the foremost expert on developing buyer personas, conduct a mock interview with myself on our buying decision for our SEO planning and management and keyword tool that we ended up going forward with. And Adele has taught us all a lot through her trainings and the book she wrote and podcast interviews with us and everybody else she's done. Taught us a ton about buyer personas and what to do with them and how to develop them. But today we are here to have her listen to her in action and see how she conducts these interviews. So to actually put all this learning and everything, right here in front of us to see how she actually how the expert does it. So Adele, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great, David. Thanks for so much for asking me to do this. My favorite thing in the whole world is to interview people about buying decisions, and I learn so much from every interview I conduct. So I'm very excited about this interview and being able to find out how you went about a real buying decision, and also being able to demonstrate. Because people, so many people say to me, what are the questions you ask? Where's the script for the interview? And I always say, it's unscripted. It's really about just getting the buyer's story. But here we are. We get to get your real story, and I get to demonstrate how it works, even though you don't have a script to go from.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. And those are the same questions I had, and I had for you when we first talked about it.
Sure.
And
it's normal. It's everybody's question. Send me the script and I'll do the interview. And I'm like, no script.
Yeah, that's right. I think if anything, if I remember from your book that I actually read twice, is I think you have the initial, opening, and then after that it's all. But we'll see for ourselves. So let's hit the ground running here, and I'm ready to try to answer the best I can.
Okay, David. Well, first of all, I really want to thank you for taking the time to share your story with us, and I'm hoping you'll just take me back to the day when you first decided that now was the time to buy an SEO and keyword research tool, and just tell me what happened. What was going on at the moment that you decided that was a priority for you?
Well, I guess it's hard to decide, exactly the exact time. As we were, learning more and more about, our trade and everything, we obviously know that we had to have a keyword focus, and so I can't remember exactly the time, but it was through reading lots of blogs and watching webinars and starting realizing that we have to do this if we're going to be doing our work correctly for our clients, being a marketing agency and needing to incorporate all the SEO benefits that go along with, content marketing strategy. We realized we needed, I guess we realized we needed one pretty much right away, as we were getting going, but that was through continuously just reading blogs and watching how other experts do stuff and having them talk about it. So it wasn't like an exact moment in time, but it was more of a, overall, kind of morphed into that.
Sure, I understand. So how long ago did this start? Did you start the search for this tool?
I'd say, the exact search, Knowing that we needed it was, a couple years ago, right when we were starting our firm, and then making a decision was, shortly after that. And then, are you asking like the research that we did, or?
Yeah. So when you actually said, okay, now we're going to go out and do research and find one and buy one, was that a couple years ago, right when you started the agency, or was it more recent?
No, it was closer to right when we started everything, and what we ended up doing. I became aware of the companies that we needed mainly. I guess through content, reading a bunch of different. We started to narrow down our choices based on who we saw the most of, really. I guess that there probably are bunches and bunches of other, good tools, but we ended up narrowing it down to SEOmoz, SEMrush, and Ahrefs. And then did do some, outreach to other SEO experts and, get their take on what they liked and what they wanted. And then we ended up setting up demos with each of those companies that we ended up narrowing down to. But again, it's kind of hard to know exactly what marketing played in the psychology of my mind. But I know that the ones that I felt most comfortable with were the ones that were putting out lots of good information and that I learned from in the past.
Sure. Yeah. So just to clarify that sort of moment when you decided to buy, it sounds like from the time you started your agency, you knew this was a requirement. Is that correct? I mean, it wasn't like we're going to start an agency and we're going to wait a couple of years. The real event that triggered this was just starting your agency. So you saw this then as one of the core tools for your agency. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not the most expensive, but it's probably one of the most core tools. Yes.
Okay.
Especially as less and less information started coming from Google Analytics and the information they quote unquote hide. I don't know if I'm guessing that's because they want you to get involved with AdWords, I guess, but less and less information was coming from the Google, and they were you needed a third-party app or a third-party tool to really delve in. Okay.
So that's really great. Well, thank you. So then when you started your agency and you said, hey, I know we've got to have a tool like this, tell me what you did first to even think about. I mean, you mentioned 3 companies that you evaluated. I'd like to get you to kind of take me slowly through that process where you said, okay, we're starting our agency. We've got to go look for the best SEO and keyword research tool in the market. Did you feel like you already knew the best tools, or did you have to go do some research about that?
No, not. I wouldn't say we knew at all. I was partial to one because of the grand amount of information that I've learned over the years. So I probably started making this buying decision 4 or 5 years ago without knowing it. But what we did is we did ask around to other people. We did just a bunch of online research, digging into the individual tools themselves. And I say digging in, looking at the product videos online and looking at the different features that they each had. And trying to align that with, the kind of clients, we work with, smaller and larger clients. So we definitely needed one that was, catered to local SEO as well. And some of them did, and some of them, had a little bit more emphasis on that. So that was part of, ended up being part of our buying decision, was the ones that satisfied, big, and then also local information, local parts of the tool.
Perfect. Good. So when you you mentioned that you knew one firm that you were pretty excited about already. When you started asking around to other people, did they concur, or did they give you some different perspective on firms that you hadn't thought of?
Yeah, they definitely did. I think that's where Ahrefs, or however you say it, came into the picture. It seemed like a lot of, super duper SEO, really super technical people, seem to like that tool a lot. So that came into the picture. So we were checking that out, as well as some other ones that I've kind of escaped me. But some, even lesser expensive tools, I guess, we started to look at. But we really wanted a all-in-one solution in the sense that helps us with our keyword research, helps us with the tracking of the keywords, helping give advice on what to do, and one that was, fairly obtainable to use. Some of them seem to gush a ton of information at you, and it was, could be a little overwhelming and feeling like, hey, this is all great, but we're not going to be, it seems like it might be a little bit more difficult to really navigate and utilize all this great information that they're saying they can provide. And that was,
I get it. Yeah. So when you did when you heard about these firms, did you go online then to check them out? Was that the next step, or did you do something else?
Yeah, online, reviews, and then that obviously goes down a rabbit hole when you probably navigate towards other chat boards and stuff like that. And, that just kind of is the rabbit hole you go down when you're starting to look at stuff and seeing what
rabbit hole. What does that mean?
When you go down one and then you just keep going and going and going and going. So we probably ended up getting to pages that wouldn't show up on the SERPs and maybe 450 pages deep, but you end up clicking on one thing and reading another and reading another and reading another and going to review sites, and then other stuff would pop up. And so we did a lot of online research, and it's not even like that expensive of a tool, but that wasn't as concerning to me. It needed to be reasonable in the price, but it was knowing that a ton of time is going to be spent here. So we need to make sure that we're utilizing our time, because it wasn't necessarily the cost. Obviously it would have been a factor if one was way more expensive than the other. But seeing that they all were, generally around the same, it was more of making sure that we're going to get the most bang for our buck in the sense of time from our staff using it. Sure.
I know. I get it. Yeah. So when you sort of talked around to people and looked at these reviews and looked at done your online research, at that point, do you remember how many companies actually looked interesting to you? Were there?
There was about 3 to 5. Purchase was made a bit ago, but I know we ended up at 3, and I think that there was about 5 or 6 that. And when you start Googling, best of these tools or this versus that or all that, other tools do come into the picture that you take a look at. So, but we ended up, and as as a business owner, you have to do so much. You got to work for your clients. You got to work on your own company. You got to do that. So, setting up sales calls, it's kind of a big deal, just because we have just so much other stuff going on. So I didn't want to line up like 10 or 12, demos. So we ended up settling in about 3 demos that we ended up doing, and we did an outreach to those companies to set those up. So once we did all of our research, decided on, and this decision was made directly with my COO, because he's going to be using it the most. So I had, I definitely assigned him to look and do some pre-trials with each one and look into them yourself, because you're going to be using this. I did a bit of the upfront work and narrowed it down, but then at that point I had to get my team involved, because they're going to be using it and they need to be comfortable with it, and I had to get their input as well.
So was your team then out doing this online research before you chose the 3 for the demos, or did that come after?
No, I narrowed it down, and then had them look into the final few choices.
Okay. And so, David, and I realize, and ideally we would be doing this interview within 6 months to a year of the purchase. So this is a little, we're doing this interview for the benefit of your audience today, and just want them to know that because this isn't as recent, we aren't getting some of the specifics because it's hard for you to recall that. And so we, in a real study, we would never interview anyone for whom the purchase was a couple of years ago. But let's go to those 3 companies that you chose to demo with. I'm wondering if you can recall what it was about those 3 companies that had you say, these are the only 3 we're going to demo with. I mean, what was sort of missing about the others that had them get left out at that stage?
I think it was definitely what they displayed on their websites. There's some that, we had some good, they were up there in the, suggestions from, everything that we ended up narrowing down to, but some of them just didn't really have as good a demos online that intrigued us enough that really felt it was all encompassing. Some of them felt a little light on, so it was definitely, I definitely remember looking into all their websites, and I was like, okay, these are the hot, and the same ones kept coming up in all the ratings. So it was able to kind of get some confidence that way. But I definitely remember some of the on page, their homepage and the demos. I keep saying demos, but I don't mean that. I mean like the product, minute or 2 video that shows how everything works. Weren't as impressive as some of these others. And I remember definitely looking into that and just, thinking that that's just a little bit too light. And some of them were very inexpensive tools, but I will say that, price yourself accordingly, and that doesn't mean be below the competition. It means be around the right price, because, definitely some of them that were so cheap, just my brain triggers says, well, that's probably a lesser effective tool. And I know that's not fair to the company if they got they found a way to do it super cheap and as effective, but it definitely kind of, raises an eyebrow if it's not in line with all the other really good tools that are similarly priced.
So the price was sometimes a red flag, but I'm also interested because you mentioned a little bit ago that you didn't want this tool to be gushing a ton of information at you, and it made it seem too complicated. With these videos, was it the opposite of that? Did it look like they were just too simplistic and wouldn't give you enough information? Can you tell me a little bit more about, and again, recognizing it's been a little too long since this buying decision, but is there anything about those demos that you can remember that would contrast them with the videos, better term, with the videos that you did like?
I will say not all of them had the walkthroughs as well. And the ones that did were obviously, okay, this is definitely what we're going for. Man, that's a really good question. And and I wish I
that's okay, because we're mainly trying to demonstrate we're just mainly trying to demo what a buyer persona interview looks like right now. And what I want to emphasize for the people that are listening to this interview is that this is the kind of detail that is just gold for us as marketers, right? Which is, what were people looking for on our website? What did they hope to find? What did they get? What didn't they get? And you can get this not only for your own solution, but for your competitors. So we'll move on.
Well, but I mean, I will say again, the ones that that spoke to what I was looking for, part of what I was looking for, the local emphasis, and at least the content around that, and then as well as in the on their website, mentioning that's also what it was good for was a big thing that intrigued me, and I obviously I don't think I can be the can I mention the one that we ended up choosing?
You can mention it.
Yeah, sure. I obviously wasn't the only person thinking this way. We ended up going with SEOmoz, and I will say they actually had a head start just because I really watch ran Fishkin stuff all the time. And I really just felt like, I even told my team, I was like, I think we're going to go with this one, but we still were looking at the other ones. I was like, I just learned so much from this guy. I feel like I owe it to him. And but another tool did take the lead for a little bit. We almost went with SEMrush because it was just it's a very great. All these tools we mentioned are all great tools, but we almost went with SEMrush and even had a couple calls with their sales team and almost went with them, but. I will say when they did their demo, it could be a little overwhelming. There's so many things you can do with it, but I felt like if they would have tailored it a little bit more to exactly kind of what I was looking for in the local stuff, we would have maybe gone with them. But like I said, I don't think I'm the only person that had this need, because Moz ended up starting at Moz Local, which is a tie-in to it. So they obviously have probably listened to lots of customer feedback, and they ended up going adding that product line in, which ended up kind of being the kicker for us. Was okay, you have SEOmoz that we got to use, but then we also could tie in Moz Local, and it felt comfortable going with a company that we could accomplish both things with.
So there were 3 demos. How did the third company get included?
That was mainly from it was actually, I think, from one of our podcast speakers, suggested that, Ahrefs was a good one. So we considered them, but it was much, similar to a little bit of a turnoff with SEMrush was there's this, they just throw so much at you that if you're looking to, if you can understand like everything that they're showing you right off the bat, well, you probably have almost already made your decision yet, I would assume, but really kind of sculpting, the demos to what we were looking for and what we needed would have definitely helped their cause. But instead, it was just like, here's everything you can do, and you're taking all this in like in 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes max, and it was a lot. It was a lot of information, and I felt like they almost did a little bid of overkill there.
Now, you said your team was sitting in on this at these demos, and so did they trial all 3? Did you guys actually do a trial for all 3, or did you not get that far with?
We did. I think we ended up doing a trial with SEOmoz and SEMrush is what we ended up at, and we just liked the functioning. At that point, it just what felt better to use. What actually was easier to actually utilize at that point, and that's when we made the final decision to go with SEOmoz.
Yeah, ease of use is such an interesting topic. It's one of my favorites. So, talk to me a little bit about the kinds of use. What did you put the product through its paces with, and where did you notice the differences in ease of use? That's a question where I would have to bring my CEO in, because this is at the point where I was heavily involved in the decision setting it up, but then I just went to my my team and asked how was it, here are the things that we needed, here's the information I know we need to get out of it, how did it go for you, so okay. I guess a key point in the marketing stuff for that, I guess, for the listeners would be to speak to when you're marketing, don't just marketing to the founder and the CEO economic
or
buyer, but talk to the lead evaluator.
Exactly.
So we'll talk about that in just a minute if you want. One, I want to stay with your story for a minute ago, though. So David, so when you talk to your team, and remind me again, that was your COO and what other, I don't need names, just what other roles were involved in this?
Actually, the main people involved were myself and my CEO, as far as like the decision in the trial and deciding which one we're going with. Yes.
You didn't have any other users working on the trial?
No.
Okay. So did your COO, was he completely clear that this was the right? I mean, were there any but oh, if, or boy, if, but we do like that, or was it just 100% SEOmoz?
No, I mean, there were some things that that some of the other tools could go a little bit deeper on, but again, it really didn't. It went, so deep that it was, it wasn't really an advantage for us. And so, again, that's why I think some of those other tools might be really good for certain types of, job roles and companies and such. But we just didn't, it never really resonated with us. And again, maybe it's something we're missing, but in the gushing of information that was sent at us, it could have been lost in trying to swallow all of that,
Right.
So, the platform and what we ended up finding with SEOmoz was great. Now, granted, I wish they could go a little bit deeper on some things like, tracking keywords that are ranked past a certain amount that they offer. But, I guess you're never going to get, one perfect tool, I guess. So there were some things that we wish could be a little bit better, but nothing that hindered, our, what we're able to accomplish and keep track of and accomplish.
I didn't catch what you just said completely. Can you say more about that, David? Is the tracking keywords, there was one thing around tracking keywords.
Yeah, like SEOmoz doesn't go past, at least that I'm looking at, maybe I'm not using it correctly, but past rankings of 50 on on SERP ranking. And it would be nice, as you're getting going with a new account that's not ranking at all to be able to track those a little bit better. So that I wish could be a little bit different. Again, it could be something I'm not using correctly, but I've delved into it. But again, overall, it's satisfying what we're needing with it. And we also have some other partners that use some of these other tools that we can draw on if we have to go deeper on stuff. But overall, it really came down to speaking to what we were looking for, which was on the local level. In addition, and again, I really think a ton of psychology played in this, because I went into it almost certain we were going to go with SEOmoz, and then we stopped and did a ton of research, and like I said, they lost the lead a little bit, but then they got it back once we ended up doing the demos and looking at their continuing focus on the local aspect of everything.
What at that moment where you said it was kind of a psychological thing where they kind of lost the lead a little bit, what was that about at that moment? Well, tell me about that.
I don't know. I remember, really people, I think it might have been a few people in a row really singing the praises of SEMrush, but at the same time, they never said anything negative about the others, but they just were saying, this is the tool that I like. But, again, that could have just been what they were used to. So that's when we stopped and really, took a lot of time, because again, it wasn't the cost that was a concern to us. It was, we're going to be using this, and the last thing I need to do is put something in place that people are intimidated by and aren't going to use it to its fullest. So,
and people being your clients, are your clients using this, or
no, our team, our team here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it ended up coming down to the clarity of what we were looking for, and just the ease of navigation and using the tool and setting. It seems to be a lot easier to function that way. At least that was the appearance. Of course, we didn't move forward with the other tools, so I don't know. Maybe it's similar, but it didn't feel that way once you look at everything. It was just, I really think this other companies, if they're listening, they really need to. I say that, but they're both very successful, so they're obviously doing some things right. But it really felt like just too much info, not tailored information being sent to you with what you're looking for.
And I have one final question, David. Was this actually the least expensive solution that you selected, or was it the most? Where did it fit in terms of the pricing?
With the tag on with the Moz Local, it probably ended up being right in the middle, if not ended up spending a little bit more than the other tools just because we ended up getting that add-on piece. So, price ended up really not being too much of a factor.
Did the other companies not even have a local tool?
If they did, they didn't. It wasn't communicated, and it wasn't highlighted. It wasn't at the forefront of what they were talking about or any information that I'd ever read on them. And when we, I'm pretty positive. I remember, asking about it, and there just wasn't a lot of, it didn't seem to cater to that at all. And I think at the time, SEOmoz was coming out with Moz Local. I think it might have been after that, and that was intriguing to us as well.
Well, David, I'm going to, in the interest of time, and I'm going to go ahead and end this interview right now. I think you've given us a ton of useful information, and I learned a lot. I really appreciate your time on it. You want to spend a few minutes talking about the interview? And
100%. That's what I was going to ask to do.
Okay.
Now, let's see what pieces of information you took. Now, of course, for all listeners, Adele suggests you do what about 8, anywhere from 6 to 10 interviews? Is that about accurate?
Yeah, we recommend at 8. We actually do 10 for our clients when we do these studies, and we would have recorded this interview. Actually, we are recording it, and we would be then transcribing the interviews, and we'd be looking for patterns across. And so the persona is built not from a single interview, but by doing this exact same interview with other people. We were just talking to the economic buyer. I'll mention that there's really, in a complex sale, there's 2 types of buyers. There's the economic buyer who makes the decision to invest in the category of solution and who also signs off on it. And then the other buyer is what we would call the lead evaluator. And the lead evaluator is much closer to the actual research and assessment on which options to consider. Now, because this is a small company and David filled a couple of roles here, he actually did some of the research himself. In a bigger company or where there's multiple decision makers, we would tend to want to interview the lead evaluator, because that's the person who can go deep on comparing the different products and what stood out and what didn't. So that's just one note. Usually when we talk to economic buyers, we'll blend those with some interviews with the lead evaluators just so we get all those insights. But then we're going to go look for patterns across the interviews, patterns around what we call our 5 rings of buying insight. And then that's how we build the persona. We pull out verbatim quotes. We'd want you to pull out quotes from this interview and that bring color to these points. And then you'd be looking for where, for instance, let's say we had 3 people who said that local SEO was a big requirement. We'd go pull out a quote from 3 different interviews talking about why local was so important or what was important about that. Or we had 3 interviews where people talked about, being overwhelmed by the amount of information, and we pull out 3 quotes, 3 or 4 or 5 quotes related to that. And that's how we build the persona, is by looking for patterns around what was important. The trigger here, the priority initiative insight, was around starting his agency. And so, at the beginning of the interview, we got David to talk about what the trigger moment was, and so now we might have had 3 or 4 interviews where that was the priority initiative. Hey, I start an agency. I know one of the first tools I have to have is an SEO and keyword research tool, but then there might be other interviews where it was something else, a particular client or something. And so we're looking for patterns around the priority initiative, what triggers it, how the buyer defines success, what were their barriers to choosing us. Let's say in this case, maybe I was doing this work for SEOmoz. In that case, it would have been nice to have talked to the COO and get more detail on what they did like about the SEMrush and some of the other tools. The decision criteria, we got some around that, not too much information around the local, we probably would have spent more time with the COO on some of the tracking that he wanted to do with it, maybe get into more of those details. And then the buyer's journey, represents the phases that he went through to make this decision and who was involved. So we're just going through these 10 interviews and pulling out all those quotes, organizing those quotes based on the key insights, and then that's your buyer persona.
Awesome. Now, so do you do suggest, like you say you do 10 interviews. Now, of those 10 interviews, are those 10 separate companies, or would you include myself and then same company, the CEO who actually, ended up doing the trial?
10 separate companies. We want to get, with the buyer persona, we're trying to get an insight into how a market full of buyers thinks about the buying decision we want to influence. Mm-hmm. So, people think 10's a small number, but it is interesting. When we do research, we charge people by the number for each interview. And mm-hmm. so people sometimes pay us to do more than 10. And what we've discovered is that those 5 insights after 10 interviews, they don't change enough to make there's a point of diminishing return in terms of the new insights you get. Mm-hmm. And so 10 seems to be about the magic number, but you do want 10 different companies.
Okay.
And most of our studies, we would either talk to the lead evaluator or the economic buyer. We choose which persona we're going to build. So that would be unusual where we would talk to the same people, To
the same, it's 2 people in the same company?
Yeah, we would never talk to 2 people in the same company, but we would choose either the COO or the CEO in your case.
Now, how would you go about dealing with this for a company that, did make a buying decision like we did, where, I took the lead on narrowing things down, and I took the lead on, I guess, understanding that we needed this and then narrowing mm-hmm. it down and then bringing my team in to help with the final decision. Because those are obviously, what caught my attention was on the marketing side, and then what actually caught, obviously, the CEO's attention was how, the demos went and how mm-hmm. Whatever questions he might have had at that time, how all that went. So it's kind of two separated type of experience.
Roles, yeah.
Yeah.
And where we found that we'd probably want to do 6 interviews with each of you, but in different companies.
Oh, okay.
So we could do 6 interviews with the economic buyer and 6 interviews with the lead evaluator, but we wouldn't do them in the same company.
Understood. Now, I understand, I'm only one person who did this. But let's assume that there were some patterns that were made that were discovered. How could you pull out? Let's just assume everybody said the exact same thing that I did. So how can you, as far as marketing messaging, via online ads or ads, what suggestion would you give for somebody, an SEO and keyword research tool?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say they should do?
I mean, one of the key insights I got from my interview, and what's great about it is it's even if there were other people that said similar things, they'd say them a little differently. And mm-hmm. I would never be stuck trying to build a strategy around with as little information as you just provided, right? Not to mm-hmm. discredit what you did, David, but there were 2 really key insights here that came out of this one interview, and one was the just really critical importance to make this seem like it's got a lot of useful information, but that it's very easy to assimilate that information. Mm-hmm. So you talked repeatedly around, the sense of being overwhelmed by the amount of information and perhaps irrelevant information. Mm-hmm. And information that you deemed irrelevant. So I would be doubling down, if I were SEMrush listening to this interview and maybe they were my client for this study and we had just interviewed you as someone that they didn't persuade, I would be focused on how do we make sure that every step in the buyer's journey feeds them the appropriate amount of information. And maybe I'd have different personas for, you sort of implied, David, that there might be a buyer out there who's looking for that information. I'd probably be wanting to segment the market and make sure that I had a demo that was more appropriate for your type of buyer persona versus the one who was looking for all that information.
Yeah.
Same thing for the people who lost you and never even got to that phase, whose demos were too thin or videos were too thin, and we'd be looking at how do we build, it's entirely possible that those tools, and this isn't to make you feel bad about your decision, David, but it's entirely possible that those tools actually could address your needs, but that the company hadn't invested properly in doing that, in those videos to make them display what you needed to know.
Awesome. Now, talk a little bit about, how you started off with Take Me Back to the Day. And I believe that is where you start off all your interviews, if I'm not correct. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So that's the one thing, that's the one common thing that you do. The one, just the starting point.
Right.
Then where was your strategy from, what you were, looking to accomplish through the buyer persona? Like, how, I'll just say, it felt supernatural, everything you were doing. So it's hard for me to pinpoint what you were strategically doing though.
Yeah.
So can you just talk about strategically, you start off with that to kind of get people there, and then, where you went, from a tactical standpoint, I guess.
Perfect, David. Yes, certainly. So it's meant to feel like a conversation and to get the buyer just to, warm up and tell a story. So that's good. It felt that way. If you listen back to this recording, you'll see that in the very beginning of the interview, you tried to answer the question around that I asked around what triggered your investment, and then you very quickly went through the rest of your decision. You said, we really had one in mind from the beginning, and we went out and looked at all these other companies, but we chose one, and you went all the way to the end of your decision. And this is what almost every person will do that you interview. And probably the biggest mistake that people make when they're new at doing these interviews is that they assume that the interview's over. They're kind of lost. So if you listen back to this recording, you'll see that what I did is I didn't take the bait on asking you any questions related to your final choice, even though you'd already sort of brought that up and you were at the end of your story. I instead led you carefully back to the beginning of your story by asking you some additional questions about that triggering moment. Oh, was this, how recent was this decision? Was it something that you'd done? How, was this when you started your agency? Just making sure that I really understood what really that triggering moment was. And then you still started skipping ahead in your story again. You tried to go to the end, and I brought you back one more time. I said, now I want to go back to the time when you first decided that you needed these. And, you probably knew about a couple of companies. Were those the only ones you considered, or did you actually do some research? And so I kept bringing you back to the earliest part of your story where I didn't yet have sufficient insight. I kept taking you back to that earliest stage in your journey where I wanted you to elaborate. And I never asked you a probing question on anything until I got the earliest stage of your journey, till I got you to describe that in as much detail as you could.
Gotcha.
And that's the strategy.
Okay. I know, and you did do that. You definitely did do that. I noticed it without noticing it. And I felt you wrangling me back into trying to get some more information on those front decisions and what exact research did I do? What caught my attention? So you start off there, and then just if you do have people go forward, just don't think it's over. Keep going back until you get the information you're looking for. And the key parts that you made sure that you cover, almost what are some of the bottom, the basics that you have to come away from an interview, in your opinion, that you feel if it was successful would be what?
So I want to know from their step what triggered the investment from the beginning, what happened. Then I want to know everything they did and thought about at each phase of the journey. The other trick I used there a little bit is I said, well, after you did your research, how many companies were you evaluating? And what that does is it anchors you in the part of your story when you still had a number of companies in consideration. So what I'm doing there is, in a complex sale, buyers do start with a triggering moment, and then they go and do research, and I want to flesh out everything they did. And I asked you a lot of questions about your research phase, talking to your peers, and what did they tell you, and how did what they told you influence who you decided to evaluate, right? And how did what you saw online influence what you decided to evaluate? So I want to get a whole picture of how you decided who to include in your consideration set. And then I want to walk you in the part that you weren't a part of as much, and so it was the thinnest part of this interview, is how you actually went through that in-depth assessment of each of those three companies.
Yeah.
So I would want to capture that, because that gets all your decision criteria, gets into more detail about perceptions about each of the companies you evaluated. This can be a rich source of competitive insight, and it can also tell us how, with more precision, how SEMrush and the other company was eliminated from consideration, which would be, because these are perceptions on your part, and you acknowledge this, is it would have given us clues to give if we were a marketer for SEMrush, we'd get to see what we needed to do better in order to win the kind of business from a type of buyer you are, who's potentially overwhelmed by all the information we have. And I even probed on the question about local. That was another really important aspect of your decision criteria. And I asked you, do they have that? So your perception is that they probably don't. But if they do, then we'd start to see in our marketing messages for those companies how we need to bring that information up front.
Now, you mentioned, you wanted to probe on each phase of the buying journey. The buying journey, can be broken down to 3 to 5, and some people even will say 25 stages. But when for the purposes of this, are you mainly talking, awareness, consideration, and buying, or what do you what boxes do you need to check as far as what you're talking about there?
That's such a great question, and I love that one. Excuse me. I love that one, David, because people do, when we label those, we try to label them based on words like you used. What we find is that once buyers have decided that they want to make this type of investment, it's really about the phase, how many companies they consider and how they begin to eliminate those. So when we're in what we would call the research, when your buyer's in the phase called a research phase, they're out there interviewing or considering the universe of options. And we might ask people, well, how many companies do you think you looked at online? And you kind of volunteered some of that. You said it might be 10 or 12. And then we say, well, what did you do next to eliminate your options? And at that point, that's where we get what the buyer describes as a step where they begin to eliminate people. So from buyers' perspectives, it's like we think of a sales funnel where we have, 100 leads, and then they become, 50 suspects, and then they become 20 prospects, and we win 5 deals or whatever. Terrible conversion rate. But for buyers, it's something quite similar to that, where they start with 20 companies, and then they narrow it to 10, and then they narrow it to 4, and then they narrow it to 1. So those are the real phases of the buyer's journey. And for the purposes of communication, we can put labels on those. We can call those research, assess, evaluate, and decide. It doesn't matter what we call them, but buyers don't think that way. They think, oh, we're going to go out there and we're going to begin to narrow this universe of options until we choose one.
Yeah, and it almost sounds like you could simply, have the 3 categories: awareness, consideration, and buying, and say, hey, everything about awareness, like how did you, what did you, and stop me if I'm wrong here, but, with the awareness, you need to figure out, when they found out they needed a solution, and then at the top of that, how'd you even know who to even look into, and then you get into consideration, and then it's all those things, like, well, who did you consider, why did you consider, okay, what did you consider about them, what did you like about them? So it almost feels like, for the purposes of not overwhelming people who are going to be doing this, am I kind of going down the right path there if you do that and then just check these boxes off, everything within awareness and then everything within the consideration from every single angle, and just get those answered,
Yeah,
everything.
but just be careful, though, that you let the buyer's words be the source of your questions. And so while I was listening to you, I was writing down just 3 or 4 key words out of everything you said. So, like, I wrote down rabbit hole, and I wrote down not cost, but mostly time. And I wrote down product videos and don't have walkthroughs. Because instead of asking people questions like you just described, what I wanted to go back, because what makes it feel like a conversation and a dialogue and gets people to open up and even get sometimes quite emotional about their choice, is when instead of asking a question that I've scripted or written down or that I care about, I instead ask them to tell me more about something they said, and I use your words as my question. So you're right that those are kind of and we do have a sort of a table in our training where we show people the 5 stages and kind of how to think of the interview in terms of those 5 stages. But the reality is, the more you can use the buyer's words to ask the next question, the more the person will interact with you like a human being, and like somebody like it just feels open. And ideally, at the end of the interview, people will say, particularly when this is something they've just finished and they've spent, 6 months trying to do this evaluation. And as you said, this is an important decision. It's not about the cost. It's about how this is going to affect your success as an agency. And if I'd interviewed you right after this was over, there would have been even more emotion and passion in your voice around this.
Oh, absolutely.
And at the end of the interview, you'd been very likely to say to me what we hear all the time, gee, Adele, thank you so much. That was fun to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Adele, this was awesome. I'm really hoping we gave people, it's one thing reading and learning and all that, but then to kind of see you in action, because, obviously this would have been a little bit better if I had, more intimate, super duper details that I could have recalled. It's been a while now, but that would have been great. But even without that, you could still see how you were digging for those answers in a way that did make it very conversational, and how you loop back. And I'm glad we gave some pointers like that, because I can see these things ending short without you getting the information, just because you're at the end on accident. So I think you really showed people your methodology and your skill with this. So greatly appreciate that. This has to be helpful to lots of people. It's, like I said, there's one thing reading it, and then there's one thing actually, learning from a mentor where you actually see them in action. So greatly appreciate it, Adele, and I look forward to making sure everybody on our staff listens to this, and we continue to get better in this area as well.
Well, thank you for having me, David. It was really fun to chat with you today, and hoping that we have many more times to talk together soon.